Allyson Stewart-Allen, thank you for joining us on the Forward podcast today. It's always delightful to talk to you, and thank you for giving us some of your time. Allyson, I've known you probably for a year or so now, and have always been inspired by our conversations. Right from when you told me about your book, Working with Americans, and authoring that many moons ago, right through to all of your work advising. I think it's over 260 or 70 companies, I think now, and the like. I think you've been described as a marketing muse by Sky News and others, working with CNN and many people. So it's always fun to have a conversation with you, and it's delightful to have you with us again. So thanks, Allyson, for giving us some time, and welcome to the Full Forward podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for this wonderful invitation. It's a treat to be here and get to know more members and, yeah, really enjoy it. So thank you.
Well, let's get us started. I think one of the things that the Full Forward podcast is really focused on is this idea of normalizing failure. How do we make it easier for leaders to talk about when things go wrong? Because ultimately that's where most of the learning happens. And yet, as C-suite leaders, we're often seen to be, or we don't allow ourselves perhaps to publicly fail or to be seen to be failing because it's not good often in how we perceive it. I mentioned before, but I mean, you've advised over 260, 270 companies around the world in how to market themselves, how to position themselves. What are some of the biggest mishaps that you've seen companies make, particularly when they're marketing themselves across borders? And what are some of the key leadership lessons that you've seen come out of those, Allyson?
So I think generally speaking, the mistakes arise from the assumptions that the companies make and the leaders make that the international marketplace is very much like the one at home. So that could be around their preferences about color, about the size of a package. In the professional services or B2B space, it's about their attitudes towards service and how they like to be served. And sometimes it's a brand name problem. Where that doesn't really translate to another country or another language. Sometimes they haven't done their homework well enough. And sometimes it's a combination of every single one of those points. And, one of the things that wakes leaders up is when they're confronted with one of these mistakes from arising from their assumptions or their arrogance. Rather than admitting ignorance, and I wouldn't call it ignorance, but I would say being open to learning and not assuming the rest of the world is like they know it, but that it is in fact different. And I think the more leaders make the assumption the world is different rather than the world is the same, they're on safer ground because they're then going to challenge and check their thinking and say, well, really, would this work? Does this value proposition translate into France or China or some other part of the world? And you start with inquiry rather than starting with advocacy or assuming my way's the right way. I know everything. Of course, this country and their customers or clients or consumers are going to love what we do. Let's just get on with rolling it out. Well, that's quite an expensive undertaking when you then come up against pushback or intense competition that you really hadn't studied well enough. So, I mean, there's so many examples. I'm just trying to think of where to even start. I mean, here in the UK, one of the sort of prime examples was Tesco, the grocery retailer. And Tesco decided that expanding in the US was going to be hugely profitable, so let's go over there and let's give it a new name, which in hindsight was extremely smart of Tesco to do. So they called it Fresh and Easy. and they decided California was where they would set up small footprint, small square footage stores, convenience stores, much like the Tesco Express format here in the UK and Europe, replicate it but give it a new name. And
Yeah.
smartly, they set up a replica of what they intended, a full-size store that they built within a soundstage in the eastern part of LA. And they recruited customers, and the reason they hid it in a soundstage is they didn't want to alert Walmart or any of the Target, any of the other everyday low price retailers who sell food. They didn't want to alert them that they were looking at expanding in the States. So by having it hidden under in a soundstage, no one would really know. So they recruit shoppers, they set up a full store, how they intended it when they were in proper retail sites, and studied everything. So they had an incredible wealth of data about American shoppers, their preferences, and they ignored it all. And when they did launch their stores, they only launched a few to see how they would go and to work out the teething problems before doing a national rollout. But California made sense as the place to start because it's a place that celebrates innovation, celebrates anything new, much like the rest of the US, but in particular, California is pretty open to new ideas, new retail ideas in particular. So long story short, after, I don't know, about a year and a bit, Tesco realized that they got this really wrong. The store environment was wrong. The experience in the store felt really down market. And American shoppers and Americans generally are very aspirational. So we don't want to be reminded we're on a tight budget. Don't treat us like we don't have any money. So, but that's exactly what the store environment was. It was like buzzing fluorescent strip lights. It was cutaway boxes for the merchandise that just looks really down market. The prices were keen, but again, one other thing that Americans weren't used to at the time, and we're talking now about, 10, 12 years ago, but Americans were not used to self-service checkouts. We're a service economy. We expect Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts at the end of the conveyor belt to pack our groceries, and we'll give them a couple dollars for their fundraise, or the staff pack your groceries and help you get it to the car, or you get it to the car. But so suddenly we have to scan the barcodes ourselves and pack our own groceries? What is that? Why we're now working for the retailer. So this was a concept that seemed way too alien to Californians and is still pretty alien for most Americans. So that plus a number of other mistakes, Tesco realized actually this is really not working and ended up exiting the US market. It cost them a lot, hundreds of millions to leave. And they sold it ultimately, ironically, to Walmart. And Walmart got to have these great sites already and locations and learned what not to do in a small footprint store. So I know that's a very long answer to your brief question, but that's just one example of companies of all sizes, by the way. It doesn't need to be the size of a Tesco. There's a lot of examples of much smaller companies that make similar mistakes because of the reasons I've just outlined.
Yeah, listening to the data, making sure you're customer focused. Yeah, really, really interesting. I was actually there last week, and I'd noticed Aldi are making a push into the US, and really interesting that you were saying about how culturally it didn't fit when Tesco tried to do those things. Obviously, that's some of the things that are synonymous with Aldi in terms of the low pricing and the kind of the budget feel, but you're getting for what you pay for. It'll be interesting to see how they get on, as that push comes through. So maybe we can revisit this in 12 months or a year's time, 12 months or so, and see how they get on. But certainly very interesting. Look, you've spent most of the last 30 years, obviously, in international marketing partners, helping businesses translate that UK-US narrative. Um, how do you help? I think it's common that we're hearing from members and leaders the challenges of managing teams or working with colleagues across the border. What are some of the key things that you ask leaders to think about when they're trying to overcome some of that misalignment that happens between the cultures of the UK and the US when they're working together? What are the things that leaders should be thinking about?
Well, I think one thing leaders need to think about when they're leading American teams and leading Americans, one aspect is uh, assigning credit to the individual team member and each team member and doing a shout out to recognize each contribution from the members of the team individually rather than as a collective. So the American culture, business culture, is very much about the individual. And while you incentivize team performance, because every business should incentivize team performance, you also need to highly incentivize individual performance in the US. And that's reflected both in the salaries that are paid. You know, very often you'll have a moderate base, but a really high uh, bonus percentage that an American professional will expect. But they'll also expect to get recognized for their own unique talents and DNA and what they bring to the party. And I think that's something that may be somewhat new to non-American leaders. I think the other thing, or another thing about leading American colleagues is it's a high feedback culture. So we want to know regularly how we're doing, have a check-in. Are we doing well? Are you happy with what I'm doing? What can I improve? And the improvements are always framed in a positive light. So while you might, with European, professionals and colleagues, want to be very balanced. So here's what's going well. Here's what's really not going well. And these are the things you ought to focus on and keep doing the good work on the stuff that's working. If it's framed that way, an American is likely to be demotivated because you're focusing on lots of stuff that's not going well, and you don't think very highly of me, and you possibly therefore also don't like me. And we conflate criticism with liking. Whereas in Europe, and I consider the UK part of Europe, that isn't happening. We value here, this side of the Atlantic, in Europe and the UK, that balance of here's what's working well, and here's what this needs to be better, this isn't working. So it's essential that you frame the what isn't working with Americans as an opportunity to be even more effective, an opportunity to be an even better contributor to the team, an opportunity to sell even more. So we're very deliberate in our language by framing it as an opportunity to be even better. So we don't want to give you an indication that we think you're not good enough today. We already think you're great. We want you to be greater. And that's, yeah, I think for Europeans that may feel disingenuous and a bit false and kind of sugarcoating reality. But if the goal is not to alienate your American counterpart, but to get the most motivation out of them and to get them to do the best job, it has to be framed that way.
What about thinking the other way across the pond then? So obviously a good chunk of our members are based in the US, having to work with UK colleagues. What advice could you give to them going the other way around? Because as you point out, we can be seen as sometimes a bit hard nosed maybe, and not as perhaps outgoing in how we work. So would love to kind of perhaps give them some advice on how to handle us Brits in the best way possible.
That's a great question. So one of the things for Americans that's really difficult for in working with British English is that British English is a really different language, and it's very high context. So in other words, what so American English is direct and explicit and not high context. And what that means is when Americans say something, what they say is what they mean generally. There aren't hidden messages. You don't have to read between the lines. You don't have to listen for what they haven't said because there's meaning in what is unsaid. Whereas when they're communicating with their British counterparts, uh, there will be indirect expressions. So one I use a lot when I try to help my American clients to understand is I couldn't possibly comment. So if a British colleague says I couldn't possibly comment, that means yes, but I can't go on the record officially. So I can't say yes out loud. So I'll say I couldn't possibly comment. Now, everyone in the UK knows that means yes. But what an American hears is, oh, you've signed an NDA. You're not allowed to say anything. Okay. So we're literal. And
Yeah.
listening literally when you actually need to read between the lines is, I don't know if that's a teachable skill, actually. And the reason I say that is because all of our wiring for communication happens between the ages of 0 and 3. So by the time you're 4 years old, that's set, that's done. And it's really difficult unless you spend decades or you live in both places or you have a parent who's British and a parent who's American. You probably won't get it. So I think learning British English is the first step, and being able to navigate also irony and knowing what irony is and when it's being applied. Because if you're from a country where the language is literal, irony will not, it won't live. It can't live. It needs the oxygen of high context communication to survive. So irony doesn't land with Americans. And Americans, being very earnest and direct and explicit in our communication, when met with irony, won't recognize that they have been met with irony. So you'll need to sort of say, oh no, I'm joking, or no, I'm just being ironic. And so I think it's very difficult with Americans to do it. So when I first moved here, I've been in London many years now. And to prove this point, one of my colleagues said, we celebrate the 4th of July in the UK also. And I said, you're kidding, really? And they're like, yeah, yeah. We celebrate Independence Day. It's a great festival and occasion for us to celebrate your independence. And I'm like, wow, that's fantastic. And they didn't let on. Well, I didn't detect that the whole thing was ironic, that it was about the British being glad to get rid of the US. And so I'm like, oh my God, who knew that they celebrate the 4th of July in the UK? Wow, that's fantastic. And I carried on believing this for a very long time. And then when the 4th of July came around, because I moved here in February, and the year, so by the July, I'm like, how come there's no 4th of July events in London? My colleagues just told me it's a big deal here, but it clearly is not a big deal. And then I realized that they were just actually trying to have a go at the US by saying they were glad they got rid of us. That took some doing, but that's just one of the examples.
Yeah.
You've got to you've got to start at a really basic level, but you got to master the language.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, Alison, isn't it? Because I think directly translating the language can cause issues. So, but having the context of understanding how it's delivered and who it's from, I think it's a really good point to think about, particularly when you're working at pace or you're working under stress. to deliver projects or make things happen. I think those things become heightened as well, and our desires to respond or have knee-jerk responses are even higher. So taking the pause and thinking about who said what, why, and what's the context is really, really good advice. Um, if I think about then translating that from leaders into brands, um, what have you sort of seen, particularly over the last 6 or 8 months, particularly as that international landscape has been changing quite significantly? How are you seeing that evolve in terms of how brands are using language or talking and positioning themselves both sides of the pond? Is that changing? And if so, how? And what are you seeing?
So again, just to demonstrate my American background, I think you're referring to tariffs.
Um,
And
yes, amongst many things. Yes, of course. Yeah, but tariffs is a big part, isn't it, at the moment, for sure?
yeah, so yeah, the geopolitical landscape for the UK, you know, you've got Brexit, you've got tariffs, and you've got lots of other dynamics going on in other parts of the world right now. So I think what I'm being asked about is, as regards the US and the tariff situation, help us navigate what our strategic options are. So, should we set up in America now? Should we hire a contract manufacturer? Should we hire American staff? Should we find a joint venture partner? Should we do all of the above? So, um, the ambiguity is probably at one of the highest levels it's ever been for British companies and
Mm,
British leaders of all sizes. But the smaller, more SME end of the market has more to lose when you get it wrong. And this kind of decision could potentially bankrupt your business. So you have to
yep.
be really deliberate and thoughtful and careful in making decisions like, where are we going to go next as we expand internationally? What country? Is the US still attractive? Is it super volatile? Do we go to Canada as a route to serving the American market? Do we go to other countries and then re-export if we make physical goods? If we provide a service, it's actually a whole lot easier because you can send people from head office to colonize and grow in another part of the world, if that's the right terminology. Um, but I think care is the key thing. In
Mm,
terms of a post-Brexit environment, well, it's looking like the UK and Europe and the EU are trying to align more now on a range of things: food exports, food and drink, and other goods. So that, in my opinion, is progress. And
mm,
so I think the challenge, as you framed it, over the last 6 months with all of the volatility, my advice would be not to wait. And that's also what I'm getting a lot of clients asking. Should we wait till the dust settles? The dust will probably never settle. You can't just sit around waiting while your competition is establishing a presence and building
yeah.
market share. You need to get on with it and find a way through because this volatility is going to continue for the foreseeable future. So, what you can control, for example, your products and services, the alignment of those to the customers or clients in these other parts of the world, that is in your control. So, as long as you stay focused on what you can control and where the commercial opportunities are, that's what you need to be doing.
Good advice. And as a small business owner who has feet on both sides of the pond, I'm listening intently to that. I think you can only manage the things that you're in control of, can't you? So as long as you're doing those things well, and I like the advice of getting on with it because yeah, if you wait, then someone else will step into your space or someone else will take the opportunity. So yeah, thank you for that. I think it's definitely uncertain times though, isn't it? I think the uncertainty is the thing that makes it difficult for leaders. We all like to have firm outlines and goals, but my view on uncertainty is that with uncertainty also comes opportunity, because if you listen to customers and you listen to how your product is being consumed or how you're building, then within that there is opportunity to do things differently or to stand out. So I don't know, maybe that's naive, but I feel that with the uncertainty there is opportunity if you're prepared to be brave, I suppose.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it gives you permission to look at different ways of doing things. I mean, think about what COVID did for everybody. We
Mm.
now have a new way of working. Most people I know are working from home 3 days a week and go into an office maybe twice a week. Ideally, it's the same 2 days a week. But if you had said that in, let's say 2019, mid to late 2019, and said, guess what? We're going to let everybody work from home 3 days a week, and we only want you in person 2 days a week. People would have been horrified. What? You're
Yeah.
not going to show up to the office? You got to be kidding me. But we had to find a way through. And I think COVID gave companies of all sizes permission to think, okay, how are we going to get stuff done? Okay, we're going to get everybody a laptop, get everyone if you already have a desktop, we're going to get you a camera, we're going to get you decent Wi-Fi, we're going to help give you equipment so that you can communicate with the office. We're going to have check-ins with the group on something called Zoom or Teams. I mean, a lot of stuff really did change in a really short amount of time. So, you shouldn't wait for a crisis for the opportunity to reinvent and rethink. Just you have the opportunity right now. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a crisis, but as you said, Steve, this is an opportunity with the market volatility, with the huge uncertainty to say, how could we do things better or differently than we do them now or than we did them in the past? And look at what you did during COVID as a small business and say, we learned some great lessons from COVID. Let's apply those now. Let's pretend we're in a similar moment, but it's just a bit different. What would we do differently? So yeah, I think
Mm.
it's really liberating.
Let me kind of come back to the kind of one of the things I was really interested to talk to you about was this. Obviously, the Fall Forward podcast is this idea of how do we normalize failure. You've led a business for 30 years and advised hundreds and hundreds of businesses. I'm interested to know your view and perception on failure and why. Perhaps firstly, why do we find it so hard to talk about or normalize the idea of failure? And then perhaps secondly, what failure means to you as a leader, and how that relationship may have changed over time. I'm sure it has.
So I think how we normalize failure is we see it as a necessary byproduct of any progress, and we have to reframe it. So everybody fails every day, by the way. But I don't think we should see it as failing every day. I think we should see it as learning every day
Mm.
because we've all done something every single day of our working life. We've done it, maybe put a typo in an email. We've called a wrong number. We've shown up to a meeting at the wrong time. So are those failures, or are those just events where you're like, you know what, I probably should have calendared that better. I'll do it better next time. So I think it's all about learning and about applying the learning to life. And whether we fail or whether we make a mistake in our professional lives or our personal lives, the point of why we're human is because we make mistakes and we learn from them. So it's exactly the same in a business. But if it's framed as a taint that goes with you wherever you go in every job, if it's treated that way by the senior leaders in your enterprise, that's a problem because it's really we're all learning all the time, and we ought to be a learning organization all the time, and we ought to have mechanisms that let us share what we've learned all the time and embrace it and celebrate it. So I think there are some attitudes that are prevailing, if I may say so, from certain industries, from certain types of leader who like to use it as a stick and hit people over the head with it. And really, it's a reflection on the leader who is doing that, who is using it as a stick. And it says more about that leader than it does about anything else. So all I can say is, the fish rots from the head. And if you're in an organization and the fish is rotten at the head, the rot will go all the way through the body of the fish, and it'll go all the way through the body of your enterprise. So you have to arrest it, and you have to deal with it and tackle it. And the importance of leadership cannot be understated. People achieve greatness in their working lives if they feel supported, if they feel that experimentation is celebrated, that learning is celebrated, and we need leaders like that rather than leaders that aren't like
that. I'd love to know if there was a time when you failed, Allyson, and it kind of sat with you. I always think it's interesting. We have those moments in our career where you wish you'd been swallowed by the earth, and maybe you'd probably stayed in bed that day or what have you. Putting you on the spot, but I'd love to know if there's anything that kind of really sticks out in your mind and says, "Oh gosh, I learned so much when that went wrong." I think it's always interesting to hear.
Yeah. No, there are many for me to choose from. I guess one that's very prominent for me is attending a presentation where I was part of a team, and we were trying to sell some consulting work. I won't name which company I was working in at the time, but there were 3 large corporates that employed me, so you can conclude it's one of them if you happen to look at my LinkedIn profile. Anyway, I joined this team to pitch, and there was a pre-meeting that I didn't attend because I was already committed to some other things, and I didn't make the time to catch up with the team leader before we showed up to this client pitch to sit down with him and go through the document, who was going to say what on which slide, what my slides were going to be, what I was expected to say. So I didn't do the prep, but I was super confident. I'd looked at the document and I'm like, how hard can this be? This looks straightforward. I assume I'm probably going to cover slides 8, 9, and 10, blah, blah, blah. Tons of assumptions. So we get into the meeting, and my boss introduces us individually, and doesn't really reveal what I would have wanted him to reveal and how I wanted him to describe me. He didn't describe me that way, so my own credibility was already jeopardized from the beginning because we hadn't agreed, because I hadn't gone to the prep meetings or put one in my calendar to agree what I want him to say about me. So first mistake, was first of many mistakes. Not having the prep meeting, not scripting him, then having the slides that I didn't think were mine become mine in the moment. And I'm thinking, I really don't know how to talk about this approach and methodology because I don't really know the methodology. And even though it's part of the organization's kind of toolkit in helping clients, I wasn't fluent on the methodology. So here I am trying to fluff my way through a meeting that felt like it went on forever. And anyway, long story short, we didn't win the work. And probably a big reason for that was down to me and my performance in that meeting. And I still really regret this lack of preparedness. and the fact that I just looked like an idiot who hadn't done her homework. And I learned a lot from it. I don't do that now. But I guess it's good to learn this early in your career rather than late in your career. But that's just one of many examples of, you know, mistakes I've made. Yeah.
There's something very empowering about that feeling, isn't there, of the fear that comes with being underprepared. We've all felt it, haven't we? And not wanting to be in that place again is such a good driver, isn't it? It's certainly something that I resonate, I'm sure, with many people listening to this. I'm sure there's some stories in people's heads that are being relived as we talk right now, I'm sure. Thinking about I suppose thinking about then your journey and your experience over 30 years of leading a business, that's a long period of time. What do you think about now leading a business that that perhaps you wish you knew many moons ago, that you thought, oh, I used to sweat those things, and actually now I think about these things. I'm always interested to when you speak to business leaders, think about, well, how the perception of experience, your perception changes through experience, in kind of what you would share with members, because they're at different stages of their careers in these large organizations. It's always interesting to hear the leadership advice from people who've done it for a long time, like yourself.
So I think one thing that I would advise is not every customer or client deserves you. And I'm not saying that from an arrogant point of view. I'm saying that from a point of view of the thrill of the chase might be what's driving you, but
Mm.
actually it may be that customer or client actually doesn't value what you're doing. And the first signal that they don't value your product or service is they focus on the price. And if
Mm.
they focus on the price, that tells you you haven't really done enough to defend the value you're offering because they don't see it. And so the only thing they can focus on is this costs how much? So the lesson for you is maybe either you haven't done enough to educate that customer or client, or you're trying to sell them something they just don't want and they don't get. Perhaps all the peripheral value add that you're offering is better focused on a different type of customer. So
Mm.
aligning your value, your uniqueness, your capabilities, all of the competitive advantages, as Michael Porter would suggest, and aligning those around people that will value it is really fundamental. So that's one thing I've learned, because sometimes you get so caught up and it becomes an ego thing, and you just think,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to do whatever it takes. I have to have this account. I have to win and have this logo on my website. Actually, do you? Because they don't appreciate it. And if you get into the bun fight of price, you're just going to be resentful the whole time that you did this deal that you know damn well that you're not earning what you ought to be earning. And yes, you have the logo in your portfolio of clients, but was it really all worth it in the end? Definitely it's not. So I think that's one lesson. I think another kind of learning for me is you hire for attitude and you can always provide aptitude. So if you get people as you're hiring and expanding that have the right mental mindset, they're open, they want to learn, you can give them all of the other technical skills. I
Yeah.
wouldn't get hung up on, oh, well, that person, I've looked at their CV, and even though I've interviewed them and they're fantastic, they don't have this qualification and they haven't done 3 years in this kind of enterprise and they haven't been long enough in my sector, so actually I'm going to say no. That's not, I think that's a mistake. I think you hire for their appetite to learn. uh, because they have the right attitude. I think too many companies really think about, oh, it has to be a perfect match. Well, it might be a perfect match on paper, but once they get
Yeah.
into your enterprise and you have some, you know, um, countercultural behaviors, that's much harder to fix.
It's so timely, Alison. I was in Boston last week with members in the city. We were doing a session with the author Rich Divini. He's an ex-Navy SEAL commander. And he talks about attributes instead of skills, and that actually prioritizing attributes over skills is the thing that actually we need to be thinking about as leaders, and actually for us as an organization that champions this idea of cognitive diversity, actually attributes and ideas and your views and opinions and attitude to doing things is absolutely, we think, and agree with you in terms of the way in which you build successful teams. So yeah, I love that you've spoken about that, because I think it's so timely, and I think it's something that leaders are now becoming more and more aware of. I think it's been very easy over the past to just say, oh, have you got a university degree from these types of universities? Did you go to this college? Have you done this degree? Have you got this much experience? Great. Well, then you can do the job, Susan. Actually, that's, I think, no longer the case. And I think definitely my opinion is that, with the rise of AI, that will only become more important, that you have in your organization people who are aligned to the attributes and the attitudes of your organization, because it's your values that will make you different. Everything else will be a common denominator, I think. But anyway, that we're going to go down a rabbit hole there, so I won't take us there. Allyson, one of the things that we ask our members to do is to give us some questions to ask our upcoming podcast guests. And I'd love to ask you this one, which is from one of our members, which says, what's the most common blind spot that Allyson sees C-suite leaders have when they're trying to scale their organizations across borders?
Yeah, I think the blind spot is not knowing how to understand the business culture. In other words, they'll know it's different, but they may not be able to put their finger on how to describe it. And I
Yeah.
think literacy around how to describe and categorize the differences is something that they could all do with knowing a lot more. So you and I both know if we went to China, we would be overwhelmed with how different it is from the UK or the US. It's not just language, it's the smells, it's the food, it's observing what people's behavior on the street, observing retail environments. I mean, we'd be assaulted by the differences. It would be so clear to us. But unless you have the vocabulary to say, oh, here's what I'm observing. Firstly, schedules don't really matter here. People seem to linger, get to talk to each other. So that's an interesting thing. So that's on a dimension of, tight versus loose in timekeeping. So if you appreciate and you can describe it that way, rather than just going, oh, they seem to be different in terms of how they treat time and schedules. Huh, who knew? So the more, I think the blind spot is assuming you can describe these differences and you have that vocabulary, when actually I don't think many leaders do. But you can get it. It's acquirable. There are plenty of, cross-cultural models out there that can help leaders and your members understand that stuff.
Yeah, so be inquisitive about it, I suppose. So be conscious that you don't know, and go and find out the answers, and use experts like you, Allyson, of course, to help, because that's the purpose of having that experience in the industry. So thank you for that. Allyson, the last thing we always ask our podcast guests is for a recommendation, something that as a leader helps you in your day-to-day life. It could be anything from a book, something that you do as a leader, as a behavior, as a habit. It could be all sorts of things. But I'd love to understand what recommendation you might have for our members.
So, what I have been doing for the last decade or more now is when I get home from work, um, I say hi to my husband, and then I disappear for 20 minutes. And I go to the back of the flat, close the door, and just sit and decompress. And it could be anything. It could be taking my shoes off, sitting on the sofa, rearranging a few things in the room. But I just need the space to be able to separate work from home. And I'm not always good at it. And sometimes if I've had a really challenging day, it kind of bleeds into dinner or the conversation at home. But I do try, and I'm much more deliberate now in trying to divide it, because the risk otherwise is the work and non-work blur. And
Mm.
COVID, back to that example we talked about earlier, COVID, kind of has very much blurred the lines for people between working from home and living at home, because they both are taking place often in the same space, the same physical
Yeah.
space. And I'm very fortunate that I have an office that is not at home, and I am really glad about that. But if you can't separate them physically because you work at home several days a week, you need to find a space where you can just close a door, even mentally, and just separate it from, okay, it's now 6 o'clock, or it's now 7 o'clock, and I've done all the calls I need to do today, or I've had all the meetings, and now I'm going to focus on decompression and focus on the family or focus on myself. And I think having that divide is really important. So that's how I cope.
Yeah, good advice. Taking a moment to stop and pause and I suppose order your thoughts. Yeah, I think it's hard, isn't it, sometimes to not take it home with you, and yeah, the um, when you're in the same environment, the continuity of just, oh, I'll just answer one more email, or I'll do one more call, or I'll do one more thing. It's very hard to break that cycle. So being deliberate is good advice, I think, for members. Allyson, if you don't mind, I know next week or week after next, you're heading off to Cannes for the marketing festival, Cannes Lines, which we all know very well. You're talking to a group of marketing leaders from some of the biggest organizations in the world. Obviously, here at Blend, our big focus is how we connect leaders across the industry or across the C-suite to have conversations. So with your marketing experience, I'd love to just, as a final thought, understand what you think marketing leaders should be thinking about as we head into the second half of this year and heading into 2026. What are the things that those leaders are going to be sharing with you, and what should they be thinking about in terms of the next 6, 12, 18 months as a marketing leader?
I think one of the things that marketing leaders generally and CMOs in particular are grappling with is AI, and the role AI plays in being able to personalize the products or services that you offer, and knowing how much data to use about your customer or client, because there's a very fine ethical line between scraping and revealing to your customers that you really understand them, and using information that you gleaned from their past behaviors, and stalking. And AI makes it really easy now for
Mm.
companies to know a whole lot about your behavior. I guess what's going through their minds is, do we want to let our customers know we're using this information to predict their behavior and let them know that this offer is personalized to them? Because it's a really fine line. How much do we reveal that we know? And is it going to feel creepy, or is it going to feel great that you've taken the time to understand me and you've used an AI tool to help do that. So I think that is exercising senior marketing leaders at the minute. Uh,
Mm.
the other thing I guess that's exercising them is controlling where their brands show up. So, several of the social media platforms, if not all of them, are also the biggest media outlets. So, buying media time and buying spots via programmatic on Facebook and Google and X and TikTok and all these other spaces, you're not fully in control of where your brand is going to appear. And you may
Mm.
end up next to horrible video content and harmful content as a brand. And so I think they are also worried, rightly, about the responsibility or lack of it that social media platforms are taking in ensuring that harmful content is removed so that you don't risk your having your brand featuring next to it.
Yeah.
And that's that privacy and that ethical side again. I think isn't in the minds of my clients and these CMOs I work with, and no, it's not there yet. So that's another concern that they certainly have now, and I can't see that subsiding over the coming months.
No, absolutely not. There's a long way to go. I was reading at the weekend about the conversation in the government this week around music and AI, and it's such a big area, and there's so much that is now going to be contributing to this conversation. So it's certainly going to run and run for a while. But Allyson, thank you so much for joining us today. I always enjoy our conversations, and thank you for being gracious with the time and giving it to the Blend members and all the listeners around the world. So thank you for that. And we'll look forward to having you along soon and being part of something in the Blend community in the not too distant future.
Thank you so much, Steve. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope this is helpful for my fellow members too. So thank you for this invitation.
Always, and we'll speak to you soon, Alison. Make sure you subscribe to the 4 Forward channel so you don't miss any new episodes. I'll see you soon.